Good evening, everyone. I'm Charu Niraj, Editor-in-Chief of Optima, the annual economic outlook of Daulat Ram College, and I warmly welcome you all to the second session of Optima's Research Bootcamp series. This series is designed to help students like you and me build strong research fundamentals, from literature review to research methodologies to presenting your research. Today's session continues this journey by deepening our understanding of how to plan, analyze, and communicate research effectively. A real research 101. Before we begin, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Ms. Maithili Kumar. Maithili, a proud DRC alumna and former editor-in-chief of Optima, is currently pursuing her MSc in Economics and Policy at King's College London. She has worked extensively across research and policy spaces, from analyzing farmer producer organizations at TERI to contributing policy briefs at Varahe Analytics. She has worked deeply on Indian policy during the 2024 Union Budget, analyzing sectoral allocations, fiscal trends, and key policy shifts. With her background in both academic and applied research, Maithili brings the perfect blend of experience for a session like this. With that, I'd like to invite Maithili to take the session forward. Over to you.
Hi everyone, hope I am visible and audible. I'd just like to warn everyone in advance, the fire alarms at my accommodation have been going off since morning, so if you hear some very crazy beeping, it's probably that, and I might have to run if it goes on for longer than 2 minutes. But thank you, Charu, for that very kind introduction. It's so nice to be back and chatting with fellow DRC peers because and especially through Optima, because it was a team that I was a part of since my first year in college, so it's extremely special to be back. In my initial discussion with Charu, we came to the conclusion that writing a research paper or properly researching are very technical aspects of a researcher's journey. Instead, what's more important is to set the foundations on how to approach research, because that is something that new writers and people who are new to academic writing might struggle with. So that is the idea of this session. We're going to keep it very basic, very foundational, very introductory. It's going to shape how you approach research and the checkboxes that you absolutely must tick. We also floated a form earlier, and a lot of you posed some questions, very interesting questions, and I've tried to incorporate them in my presentation for the session. However, if you still have unresolved queries and you want to question something else, feel free to drop the question in the chat box, and I'll try to wrap this up in like 45 to 50 minutes because I know it's late for you guys. So the last 10-15 minutes will be just to engage with you guys even more. Before we begin, what you should know about research is that it is the best way to learn economics. Nothing is going to teach you this field or this discipline like trying to answer a question yourself, because in the process, concepts are going to become clearer, theories will start making sense, and you begin to see how the real world connects with what you study in class. Second, no one's expecting you to be amazing at your research, all right? It is genuinely a very long learning process. Even published scholars struggle. Why do PhD scholars take like a minimum of 3 or 4 years to publish their research? Because it is so long, everyone struggles, they rewrite, you feel confused, and you're absolutely not supposed to know everything at the start, which is why when you start small, and that's completely okay. If you feel lost while doing research, congratulations, you're doing something right. Confusion is a sign that you are exploring what you know, because research at the end of the day is about entering a topic where the answers are not obvious. Feeling stuck is normal and is actually a good sign. It shows that you're progressing, right? Now, one thing that I sort of struggled with regards to the writers when I was at Optima was that everyone would just piece together facts and stitch them into an article or a research paper, when it's not that. It's about making a meaning out of those facts, right? Anyone can list data or facts, but research is going to require you to interpret those, build a logical argument, and connect that evidence to a broader idea or the theme that you're interested in. This is what will turn your work into a real research project rather than just an information dump. Undergraduates also can write research papers, even if they're modest, because you don't really need to invent a model or invent a new theory or do very high level econometrics, at least till your fourth semester, which is when Priyanka ma'am will probably take econometrics for you. But a good undergraduate research paper can be a very simple empirical analysis using descriptive statistics like mean, modes, average, percentages. You could have theoretical explanation using existing literature and even a qualitative study using interviews. We'll get into all of this. I know these just seem like words right now. But you have to understand that the goal is not to revolutionize economics. It is to show that you understand how to ask the question and how you can answer it logically. Having said that, how do you start research? The pre-research process looks a little bit like this. Before you begin doing actual research, you need to figure out what it is that you want to research. This stage is about exploring, narrowing down, and understanding what your larger interests are, right? So you start with your interests, which is almost like a funnel method, because you begin with a broad area you genuinely care about, right? So, for example, it could be that you're interested in gender issues in India. Now, think about this theme a bit more. Within it, does something particularly grab your attention even more? So, for example, maybe you care specifically about gender inequality in education in rural India. Now, that's your starting point. However, if you still struggle with finding an interest or you're unsure about what niche you want to build out of your research, another easy method is to look at current global or national events and think about how they relate to economics. So, for example, during pandemic and post-pandemic was an excellent period for academia because everyone was writing about how the pandemic applied to their disciplines and how and different fields. So it's good to do that. It's good to think about and explore how they relate to economics, especially in terms of the impact that they end up creating. Right? The second step is doing some light background reading. Now, this is a very important step because light reading, and I'll get to what that means, it will help you understand what kind of work already exists in your desired or your interest, what questions have already been asked, and what major findings have come out of it, what methods people use, and who the major scholars in that area are, so that you can go back to them and reference their work to build further in your project. Now, this does not mean reading full-length papers yet or reading them extensively, because you open a paper and it's probably like 40, 42 pages long. That's going to scare you. So don't do that. Don't read the full-length papers yet. It simply means reading abstracts, introductions of the papers to see if they align with what you're interested in. You should definitely read news articles and policy briefs to understand what actually is happening currently. And you should also read research summaries or skimming through a few papers to get the flavor. What this is going to help you, this light reading is going to help you in finding the gap in research. Now, the gap is a very used and a very important word, because as you read, you'll start noticing things that probably haven't been studied enough, or questions that remain unanswered. This is what researchers call a gap, any unexplored area or a missing link in existing literature, which you as a researcher are able to pick up. So, for example, you might realize that in a particular study that you're interested in, not much has been written about North India, or your research tells you that there is a possible comparison between two states, or maybe you want to focus on a specific age group like adolescents, right? So all these are links that you as a researcher have been able to find out. So you might want to work on that, and that is how you build a gap, or you identify a gap in research. From a gap, you now build a clear and very accurate research question. Now, it is very important for this question to be specific, answerable, and meaningful. What do each of these mean? The more specific your question is, or the more narrowed down your question is, the easier it's going to be for you to find relevant data or find sources, because otherwise you're just swimming in an ocean. You need to find a more specific area that you can research on, which is what your question should reflect. It should be answerable. Now, you can't really answer a question like, is it possible to build economies of scale on Mars? Like, that is something that probably even the most advanced scientists at NASA can't help you with. So you need to find a question that is answerable, in that you are able to find good research papers, credible research papers, and you're also able to find the relevant data. Thirdly, and this is more important, the question has to be meaningful. The point of research is to contribute to academia, to answer something that has not been explored yet, which is why the more meaningful your question is, the more people will want to read it, the more people will want to cite it. So, for example, if you go back to my earlier example about gender inequality in rural India, which was a narrowed down version of my larger interest, I can make it even more specific by framing my question in this form: the gender inequality in education in rural India, which is my narrowed theme, and I make it more specific by introducing a timeline and a specific state. So I study the trends from 1980 to 2020, which is a good enough timeline, in rural Jharkhand. The more specific it is, the more easier it is for me to conduct my research, and that's just making life easier for yourself. The thing about research question is that you'll refine it again later. No one gets it perfect on the first try. Now, having found a gap, having decided on your research question, built on it, you then move on to deciding what kind of paper you want to write. Now, these are questions, I think 3 out of the 10, 11 questions that we received were about A, what kind of paper, and B, what methodology. Now, there are two types of research papers primarily. There's a theoretical paper and there's an empirical paper. A theoretical paper is generally characterized by a model. So, for example, you must have studied the Solo model of growth or the business cycle theories. Now, these are all models that were proposed and built by researchers back in the day. They are basically a simplified representation of an economic phenomenon. That's what a model is. Now, you choose, when do you choose a theoretical paper? You choose writing a theoretical paper if you want to explore concepts, you want to explore mechanisms, and you want to understand and answer ideas at a more conceptual level. Basically, you're trying to answer why and how something happens. That is also how your question might be framed. Why so and so happens? How so and so happens? So there's a very subjective answer to it, and that is answered in a theory paper. B, you don't want to work with a data set, you don't want to work with math, so you just use a theory paper. It's easier to go ahead with a theory paper that way. But also on a more personal level, you genuinely enjoy writing, you genuinely enjoy thinking and connecting ideas and piecing them together, synthesizing perspectives. These are all things that should essentially lead you to writing a theory paper. Now you have to understand that your focus is going to be on reviewing existing theories, building some arguments, and proposing frameworks, for example, explaining mechanisms behind an economic or a social phenomena. So it's going to be extremely subjective. There's no right or wrong answer to phenomena. Honestly, it depends on your personal interpretation and what you feel is the best explanation to things. Now, what is crucial to understand is also that some theoretical papers can also have a mathematical model. For example, Solo's theory, it is pure theory, but it also has a model, right? So despite the fact that it has a mathematical model, it still has to do less with statistics and math, but rather you use it to explain real world phenomena and also make predictions. Second, what is an empirical paper? Empirical papers use math and a lot of stats and very heavy econometrics to explain how economic phenomena work. Now, if theory is teaching us how to see the world, empirical paper is going to allow us to test it. For example, a theory paper can tell us how college education can increase earnings, the social and economic aspects of it, but an empirical paper can more credibly tell us by how much that happens, right? Now, you choose an empirical paper if you like working with data, you like patterns, you like analyzing evidence and piecing them together. In such a situation, your research question is typically going to ask what? What has changed? What is the relationship? What is the impact? By how much does this change? By how much does this increase? So basically, all you're doing is you're testing something using available data. You will need some basic statistical knowledge and the ability to interpret results. Whatever suits you, you can also write a combination paper, which is combining both theory and empirical papers. This is mostly when your empirical analysis is going to require a lot of theoretical banking. The example I gave above is that of a combination paper, where you're talking about how an increase in college education is going to boost your earnings. Now, a clarification. Does an empirical paper always mean using heavy statistics? Absolutely not. Beginners can also write excellent empirical papers using very basic descriptive statistics as long as the logic is clear, the question is extremely sharp and specific, and the theory connection to real world applications is strong. Because all you need at the end of the day is publicly available data. Sorry. All you need is publicly available data for your simple statistics, the knowledge how to make simple visualizations like graphs and line charts, and you have to have clear economic reasoning. So, for example, if you want to conduct a study on female labor force participation rate, and you want to analyze how the trends in that have changed from, say, the years 2000 to 2023, all you're going to need is the female labor force participation rate data from 2000 to 2003, basic knowledge of Excel and how to enter your data in table format, the basic formula for growth and percentage so that you can analyze the growth and percentages rates, and how to visualize it in the form of bar graphs or line charts, whatever. Using all of this and giving your final interpretation, you're going to have a complete empirical paper. So it's not at all complicated. You can wait until your fourth semester, but in case you don't want to, this is how you can go ahead with it, right? Now the rule of thumb is, again, if you want to identify if you want to write a theory or an empirical paper, if your brain asks why, do a theoretical paper. If it asks what or how much, do an empirical paper. Are there any questions so far before I go on to methodology, because that is a bit technical and too much? I am assuming not. We're going to go ahead to deciding what research method you can take up. Now, again, this was also very popular questions in the forms. A lot of you were confused as to what to choose, how often to choose it, and what are the ways to go about it. Now, once you have your research question and you have decided whether your paper will be a theoretical or an empirical paper, the next step is to decide which research method fits your question and modeling your answer the best. For example, if you've chosen a theoretical paper, then your primary method will just be conceptual analysis and literature-based reading, which you're going to do using research papers. However, if you have chosen an empirical paper, then you must choose between a quantitative, a qualitative, or a mixed method approach. What is quantitative research? Quantitative methods are going to deal with numbers, measurements, and statistical analysis. Sorry, was the PPT not being shared?
No, Jani, can you please share the PPT?
Oh no, that's all right. I made a very pretty cover slide that I was very interested in showing you, but it's okay.
Right, that was a logistical inefficiency on our part. We're really sorry.
No, please don't say that. If we can just start the presentation as well.
Yes, I'm sharing it in a minute.
Sure. Before that happens, is there anything you guys want me to go over in case it was hard to follow, because now I realize there was no presentation? Anyways, I'll still begin. By then, Johnny can pin it up. Starting with choosing what methodology. I'll begin with describing both the methodologies, and then we can decipher how to use which one. Now, quantitative research or quantitative methodology deals with numbers, measurements, and statistical analysis. It is going to be a bit math and stats heavy. It is used when your question requires something to be measured, something to be compared, or something to be tested. You think of it as the scientific method's best friend, right? Now, quantitative research is going to rely a lot on numerical data to test hypotheses, measure variables, identify the trends and patterns, and make comparisons across groups of time. So, for example, if you want to conduct a study of how inflation has impacted GDP growth rates post COVID-19. You're going to have a lot of data on inflation rates, GDP growth rates, maybe even interest rates that RBI had imposed. Now, whichever statistical tool you're most comfortable with, you use that. And this becomes easier once you learn econometrics, which forms the backbone of most empirical papers. But basically, if you're working with data, it is best to go ahead with quantitative research, quantitative methodology. Now, data collection for quantitative research is also another thing in itself because you use two kinds of data: secondary data and primary data. Secondary data is one that is already collected by other organizations and other institutions, or you can use primary data, which is not very common amongst undergraduate researchers, but you still can go ahead with it. Now, starting with common sources of secondary data, um, they are largely documents and government statistics. You go to, so for example, you have NSSO and NSO data sets, Census of India, RBI handbooks, even Niti Aayog reports for that matter. They're all very credible government statistics and data sets that you can use. International databases are very popular to conduct a global study. So, for example, World Bank data is freely publicly available as well. IMF data sets, UN data, they're all very much used and credible. A third kind of data set which I've discovered post coming here is academic data sets. Now, for example, if you want to conduct a study on economic history, it is very hard to find data on what kind of sea routes were used in the 16th century, which ultimately led to increase in trade, which ended up leading to growth of economies, right? So for that sort of a study, academics themselves end up finding data and creating data sets. So you find these on websites or portfolios of those academic professors. And one thing that you need to take care of is that you always cite them properly. We'll get to citations later. But these are the three main data sets that you can use for secondary data when you're conducting a quantitative study. And these data sets are more often than not very enough for most undergraduate empirical projects. Now, I do want to touch up on primary data a bit because I know that in your second or third year, you might be interested in conducting a survey-based study. So for that, primary data is when you choose to collect your own data, often through a survey or a questionnaire. For this, it is important that you have a clearly defined sample. For example, you want to study students in class 10 from two schools, or you want to study 30 students in your class, or you want to study people who take metro in Delhi, right? This is a clearly defined sample that you have. Similarly, you have to have a very simple questionnaire. 5 to 10 to maybe 15 well-designed questions are more than enough for an undergrad paper. The reason why I want to talk about questionnaire guidelines a bit is because it's extremely important to have a very sensitive survey and a very ethical survey. And I remember, like, a lot of my friends who were doing psychology or sociology used to float around Google Forms very regularly for their research projects. So I'll touch up a bit on that. Now, basic questionnaire guidelines: keep it extremely, extremely simple. You don't want to overwhelm a respondent with a lot of questions or some very probing questions. You start with basic background. What is your age, your gender, your occupation? More often than not, they will be relevant if you want to get a sense of the demography, but they might not be. So in case they aren't, feel free to let them go. Keep it completely anonymous. Ask only what you need for your research questions. Stick to your specifics. Don't ask unnecessary questions. Also, another important thing is that you avoid leading questions. What are leading questions? For example, you ask, do you agree that online classes are bad? This can end up being a very biased question because you don't leave space for a middle ground. It can't be a yes or no question. Some people might agree only to some extent, while some don't at all. So in that case, it helps to have multiple choice or short numeric responses. So for example, you can pose your question as, on a scale of 1 to 5, do you agree that online classes are bad? That is going to help you a lot with numerical and statistical analysis when you download your responses and everything's in like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that really helps. Always test your questionnaire or your survey with at least 2 to 3 people to see if the questions are understandable, approachable, and answerable if they're being approached correctly by potential respondents. It's important to follow ethics here as well. Like I said, you have to be sensitive. You should not probe too much into the personal lives of people, and also specify to your respondents that the survey is voluntary and anonymous. I'm going to take a small break here and ask if I'm conducting a study on what influences BU students' spending behavior, is it necessity, is it peer pressure, or is it social media? What do you think, or what are your understanding of the question, and what kind of questions could you include in the survey? Does anyone want to take a go at it? Go ahead, Advita. Please don't raise your hand, just speak. You're not audible.
Still not audible.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. One question we could pose would be on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to buy a product if you saw it on Instagram or
That's
on
a great-
any other social media site?
That's a very good measure. That's a very good measure. What else? What are you most likely to spend on? Are you most likely to spend on transportation, or on going out with your friends, or on purchases, right? Or at the canteen, whatever. So, some very simple and basic questions is what define a good survey. Anyone else has any answers, any potential questions? I am assuming not. We will move on to qualitative research. Now, if there is one method that I feel economists have historically neglected, it is qualitative research. Now, the more you start reading economics and the more you start getting into the discipline, you realize that this extensive mathematization of economics as a discipline almost leads to us forgetting that behind all these theories and these models, there are actual people, there are actual faces. So, in a discipline that is now getting dominated by mathematical models, these qualitative methods focus on meanings, on experiences, and on context using an in depth investigation of a particular situation. Now, qualitative research becomes especially useful in studying socioeconomic themes like gender, caste, poverty, race, all these aspects which are very hard to quantify. Sure, you can get data on them, but the lived experiences of a social identity are very hard to quantify. So, because they cannot capture the full story, it brings genuine economic insights. Qualitative study can bring genuine economic insights to the themes that may seem as data driven on the surface. So, for example, I think this was a research paper that was taken in my very early advanced microeconomics class, where in a study that tried to explain why, of a particular firm, wages and prices did not move as economic theory predicted, two economics, whom I forgot to cite the name of, that is a very unethical thing to do, but two economists introduced fairness, the concept of fairness, trust, and behavioral expectations, which is something that's probably unheard of in economic study. And these are aspects that only qualitative inquiry could have revealed. So it is, again, very important in explaining some very central economic themes, right? So again, a thumb rule of whether you want to choose a qualitative methodology is, if you think your question could be exploratory, could be extremely subjective, and is based on human experience. How do you go ahead collecting data for a qualitative research? Interviews are most important. Now, again, I understand that because of infrastructural constraints during your undergraduate years, it might be hard to secure interviews. But even if your sample is just your classmates or your professors or people who live around you, you can have like semi-structured interviews where you prepare a list of questions and allow open conversation. Or you could have focus groups where you interview like 5 to 10 people together, and you just pick up the most common response and the most common reactions, right? So, like a couple of sample interview questions could be, how has this policy affected your daily life? How has the metro fare now being increased by 2 rupees for every fare? How has that increased your transportation accessibility? Right, these are like simple questions, and ask them about how they feel the impact and how and what changes they observe, right? Because interviews are extremely important in helping you how to understand how and why things happen, right? The second form of sourcing qualitative data is pure document based research. So in undergraduate studies, this is going to form the core of your evidence, reading and analyzing documents, right? Again, the examples of useful documents become your government reports, your policy documents. Policy briefs are extremely important. Newspaper and magazine articles, even past research papers, right? So you read these to identify patterns, to identify a narrative, to identify what the recurring themes are, and then what the major insights in the discipline have been, right? So now you have your research question. You have decided on what paper you're going to write, and you then go on to finally deciding what methodology you've opted for. Post this is where you start your actual research. So we're going to look into where and how you look to conduct research, right? Firstly, it is extremely important to know your sources. Essentially, it is all about understanding the story so far, and then you can add your own chapter. Your main sources for reliable information should be past research papers. I've repeated this well and again, that research papers, academic journals, policy reports, working papers are your most credible sources. Why? Because they have already been published. They are more often than not peer reviewed, meaning they've gone through several checks by existing scholars and renowned scholars. So there is a huge level of credibility to them, right? Now, what's also important to identify is the categorization for these resources. There are two major categories: scholarly resources and popular resources. Scholarly resources are more academic in nature. They are written by researchers, economists, and experts. They are published in journals, in university presses, in research institutes as well. And because they are, like I said, because they are peer reviewed, they're going to be more reliable. And examples of scholarly sources include Economic and Political Weekly. I don't know if you've heard of that journal. It is extremely good for Indian study and Indian economic and political study. Then the World Bank Economic Review is extremely popular. It publishes a lot, not just on development, but also on finance and country-specific studies. So these are some scholarly sources that you should definitely refer to for your research. Now, popular sources are not academic in nature. They are written for a general audience. They give very quick overviews on current debates, but not deep analysis. But I still think it's important because to start your research, you should know what's going on currently and how you can build on it, right? So it is useful for background, policy context, examples, and arguments, but not like rigorous evidence again. The examples include, again, a very credible example is probably Indian Express. Blogs include that of Indian Development Review, Ideas for India. They're amazing for economics and core economic study. Now, a tip is how you can shape your reliance on these sources is you use popular sources to understand what is happening, and you use scholarly sources to understand what research says about why it's happening and how you can connect it to your research, right? Um, any questions so far? I know it's gotten a little technical, but are there any questions so far? Okay, we'll go on to what's next in the research process. What does one look for in a paper? What you should essentially be looking for, right? You need to understand the patterns that you sort of need to identify are which authors repeatedly appear. This is crucial because these are people whose work you can refer to build your arguments even more, right? Which theories dominate the discussion? For example, on studies in gender inequality in India, you will see that feminism as a theory dominates. Patriarchy and linking patriarchy with economic exploitation are theories that dominate. So the more theories you have in your arsenal, the more you can the more credible your argument and the more credible your linkages can be. What gap does one particular research paper identify? Why that's important? A, so that you don't take the same gap, you don't try to answer the same question, or even if it is relatively close to your gap, how has the author tried to answer it? What methodology has the author used so that you can get inspired by it? And most importantly, which data sets are being used? What are credible sources of information in a study like this, and where you can source them from? So, for example, if the World Bank has released data on GDP growth rates, it is very likely that it has also released data on inflation rates and interest rates as well. So it's always good to know which data sets and where they're being sourced from. What limitations do the authors mention? Almost always in a good academic research paper, the authors will be extremely honest about what limitations they faced during their research, during their study. So you can use those limitations as well to sort of tailor your own contribution. And you can maybe even pick those limitations up and start working on them and breaking them apart, see that you can solve it or not. Um, Now, the major sources of these academic materials and where to find them. Google Scholar is the easiest and most powerful. It's not like normal Google search. It's going to direct you to proper research papers in proper journals, which is going to help your case a lot. Popular journals include the American Economic Review for a more global study, but Indian Economic Review, which is published by the Delhi School of Economics, it is extremely important for Indian economic study. JSTOR is really good to find papers from literally anywhere and everywhere. However, the problem with JSTOR is that you require either institutional access or you need to buy a subscription. But from what I know, you can access 100 articles or 100 research papers per month for free. And that's more than what most researchers do. So you're good to go. Again, like I said, Economic and Political Weekly, I really love for Indian economic study. And government portals are, again, very credible sources for data and information. Could we move to the next slide, please? Right. Now, that was a bit technical, what I explained earlier, but what I have adopted over the years and what I can suggest you people, some practices that can make your life easier. It is so important in your research to read without feeling overwhelmed, because many first year students will panic when they open a 30-page research paper which is full of equations and jargon. So it is important to have this very basic 3-step reading shortcut which I use all the time. It is called, so how you do it is you first read the abstract, then you read the introduction, and you read the conclusion. You see that in those three things, in these three sections, does it match your research question? Does it match your interest? If not, then skip the paper guilt-free. But if they do match your topic, then it is always best to, again, instead of reading it very extensively, you just skim over the literature review, you skim over the data section and the main findings. You really don't have to understand every model or every specification. You only need to understand the idea so that you can build on it. Sure, if it's a really good research paper whose findings have been revolutionary in the field, then definitely use them, cite them properly. But otherwise, you might have to read like 20 research papers for one section, and it's just not worth it to spend so much energy reading everything. Second, it is extremely important to keep track of what you read. It is so easy to lose research papers, to lose articles. You suddenly remember something you read somewhere and you don't know where you read it. So it is important to keep track of what you read. Make a reading log for yourself. There are softwares for that from what I know, but I always use Google Docs because it's easiest. For each paper, what you can do is you note down what the title was, who the author was, and what their main research question is. You summarize the main idea in 2 to 3 lines. Then specify what methodology they used. Was it a quantitative methodology? Was it a qualitative methodology? Was it mixed methods? And what you personally found very useful in the research paper, an idea that has stayed with you, or something, or an approach or an angle that you couldn't think of but you find is very relevant to the study, and any potential gap that you have noticed, right? And this constitutes a very comprehensive log. And this is also sort of a beginning to a very strong literature review. Make folders and bookmarks for everything again. Make folders for sections that you think can help you in your introduction or in setting your context. Make folders for papers that you think are very crucial to your findings or very crucial to your data. So label everything well so that you make your life a lot easier. When I talked about the research paper being relevant, you have to see that the relevance should span across these 4 domains: research question, region, research method, and results. Is the research question similar to yours? It does not have to be exactly the same. Treading along the same boundary also counts as a good similarity to sort of explore. Then the research methodology. Again, I mean, it's obviously better if the author has also used a quantitative method when you are also planning to do that. But qualitative data can also tell you a lot. So you should always be on the lookout for what methodology has been used. Region helps a lot. It doesn't have to be very specific to your study, but another author who's maybe studied about rural Jharkhand is going to have come up with a lot of insights that you can use from here and there for your research as well. So look for what region is being studied. And finally, the results. That is basically how you gauge relevance of a paper. Now, this also helps in your literature review, which we'll talk about in the structure of a paper. The third thing is to always keep refining your question. Remember when I talked about gaps and how to identify gaps? These are I think there are 7 foundational gaps you can identify in a research paper. I've tried to list down the 5 main and 5 easier ones which are easy to identify. There's a population gap, right? I think I talked about this in my introduction as well, but I'm going to reiterate that here. A population gap is where, say, most papers are about urban India, so I'll take a look at rural India. Then maybe there's a time or a period gap that the last study is from 2010. Things must have changed. Maybe I should do a study on that. Maybe we should all do this of the last one was in 2011 and there just has been no attempts at making any census, but that is the time or period gap that you can identify. Then there's also a method gap that is very interesting. So you see that everyone is using quantitative analysis, but no one has really explored a qualitative experience. This happens mostly in papers which are around gender or caste identity, social identity. So you can pick up a qualitative methodology if you feel that the prevailing methodology is quantitative. There is also a variable gap. Now, what are variables? Variables are those values in a study that change across the years. So you study the change in patterns of those variables. So for example, maybe you see that you want to study how social and economic backgrounds of the prevailing social and economic backgrounds affect certain variables. And you see that mostly the findings have been on the impact of schooling, but you want to do something around nutrition and food. So you could take nutrition as a variable up. Then the contradictory finding gaps. Paper A says X increases Y, but paper B says it decreases. Paper A says X increases, but paper B says it decreases. Why is that? What kind of a study could you conduct to sort of come up with a contradictory response? It might be hard, but with the right sort of research and the right sort of papers, you could get really good data as well. It is also sort of important, I believe, to evaluate the quality of paper. Although I am of the belief that everything that is published is relevant to someone in some corner of the world. But if, for example, you're sending your papers out for publication, credibility and what your sources have been becomes sort of important, right? So how to judge the quality of a paper is it published in a reputable journal? Again, the example of American Economic Review, EPW, the Indian Economic Review, these are very reputable journals, and we know that what they publish is going to be probably of the best quality or is going to be very informative. So you look for which journal it has been published in. Is it recent enough to be relevant? And does the methodology make sense to you? At the end of the entire research paper should make sense to you so that you can build on it. And that is how you judge the quality or evaluate the quality of the research paper. Can we move to the next slide? conducted your research, you have decided everything, you have an expansive literature at your disposal. What do you do with it? Presenting a research paper is also an extremely important part of the process. Although it is a very technical process, and I will not get very in detail. I will leave you guys with a very basic structure of a research paper. Um, just give me a second. Right. So the basic structure of a research paper goes like this. You start off with the abstract. Always and always you start off with the abstract because the objectives of an abstract are dual. A, you are selling yourself to the publisher. Ki, this is what I've written about. This is how it's relevant. Please publish me. I really want to get published. I've produced good content. So you're selling yourself to the publisher. And the second objective is that you're tempting the audience that this is everything I've written. This is probably how it's relevant to your research. Please read my work. Please cite me. So, a brief advertisement of your research paper is what you'll include in an abstract. Not more than 200 to 250 words because uh, the main idea behind this word constraint is that publishers will only like skim through the content that you submit. So it's important that you keep it very short and crisp, right? I've added an example of an abstract that I found was really impressive because it included everything, literally every section that a research paper generally has. So, for example, if you look at the first line, they're talking about what their motive was. They're clearly specifying that this was our motive. I think the research paper was on how the slave trade ended up in the different in different growth rates across countries. So the historical origins of mistrust within Africa, right? So that is they specify the motive of the paper. In the second and next couple of lines, they're talking about what data they've used, so you can identify whether the data set would be relevant to your study as well. They're also talking about the methodology because they're talking about falsification tests, which is a very famous quantitative method of quantitative methodology. And then finally, they're ending that through the testing that they did, they have been able to show that they have been able to show whatever their hypothesis for, and so they're also including their findings. The reason why you should include an abstract and everyone should include an abstract is because you as a researcher are also discerning the validity of someone else's paper by reading their abstract. So that is why it is extremely important to include a very crisp and but a very informative abstract. The next aspect of a research paper is the introduction. In the introduction, it is very important to provide context and also set the scene for your project. You talk about what your values were and what the rationale was for picking the research question. You also specify your research question and what led you to pursuing this research question. You define your variables, very important. How you pick them up, how you define them is very important. You explain which theories you have used in the research paper to back your arguments, and you also address the general limitations that you faced. At the end of your introduction, you present what your research aim was and what your objectives were to conduct this particular study. This is largely going to be your research design and your research question in a bit more elaborate form. The third section of a research paper is going to be the literature review. Now, for most research papers, especially I think if it's a theoretical paper, your literature review and your introduction will be combined. But the literature review, remember all the light reading that we talked about and how you should make a log of your research, of the research papers you read. That is all going to help you make a very synthesized and concise literature review, because here you focus on the views and arguments of other authors whose ideas you're drawing on. It is very important to show how they relate to your particular research area and how they link to your project. Don't just summarize them, but give them an interpretation. The next is methodology, specifying what methodology you're using. You have to very importantly also justify your choice of methodology. Remember, the thumb rule to identify why you should use a qualitative study or why you should use a quantitative study or a mixed study for that matter, that justification comes here in a very direct form. You should also outline the sources and the procedure of data collection. So, for example, if you've conducted a sample survey, then you clearly define what your sample was, what the demography of your sample was, how many people you surveyed, and what your survey looked like. You should also definitely define the limitations you face. So, for example, if you're doing a country study or a global study, then it is possible that you don't find data for some countries, or for some countries you don't find the data that you're looking for. So those are called missing data or missing variables. So it is important to clarify first and foremost that this was my missing data. However, I have still gone ahead with the study by using maybe proxies or whatever. That's again a very technical thing. You will maybe learn that in a different session. Finally, it is results and discussion. Generally, in more scientific papers, results and discussions are separate, but I've seen that the larger trend in economic academic writing is that you include the results and the discussions together. This is where you present all your major findings, what you learned, what your major interpretations have been, how you've been able to fill the gaps, and how you've been largely able to answer your research question is what you'll include in results and discussion. If your methodology was quantitative, you have to very clearly specify your statistical findings. So how variables relate to each other, what was the mean, what was maybe the larger percentage changes, all of those statistical things are to be included here. And for qualitative, well, the key concepts, your ideas, and your larger interpretations. Finally, it is after your results and discussions, you include a conclusion. Now, conclusion is important in that you can't just reinstate what you did in your paper or what your findings were. Instead, you tell the audience and you tell your reader how your understanding has changed or how your understanding has evolved and how you built on that understanding. Because simply stating what you did earlier is not going to help anyone's case. It's just going to be repetitive. Instead, just a bit more, a more interpretative approach to what your larger process was. It's also important to include the wider significance of your research. So throughout your research, you might have observed that this is what is wrong with the current methods, this is what is wrong with what's going on currently. So for that, these are my recommendations, these are my policy recommendations. If adopted, it will suit the model better and all of that. So this is the basic structure of a research paper. Any questions here? So it goes abstract, introduction. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Sorry. It's a very basic question, but the way you explain the abstract and the introduction, they seem kind of similar in the purpose they serve in a research paper. So could you please, for my clarity, could you please explain the difference between them once again?
Sorry, if I could explain the difference between?
Abstract and introduction, they seem kind of similar in the purpose they serve.
Right, good question. Now, think of your abstract as an advertisement or a marketing proposal for your research paper. In the abstract, you're not going to include the larger context of your study, which is going to be a part of your introduction. Abstract is limited to your research paper. So if you've chosen X method, your abstract will talk about maybe X method. If you have chosen XYZ variables, your abstract will only include those XYZ variables. Whereas in your introduction, you could also talk about other variables that exist, but you did not choose them. So your abstract is basically just a proposal for the publisher that this is what I've written and this is what is included in my research paper. Whereas an introduction is a very, very large and expansive context. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Correct.
Right, so it goes abstract, introduction, a literature review. A literature review I've also seen is optional. I mean, if you want, you can include it. If not, it's completely all right. Methodologies, the results in your discussions, and finally the conclusion. That is the basic skeleton of your research paper. Now, this is important. The next slide is extremely important. The ethics of research. I think we had a couple of questions about this as well. Um, Ethics of research are centered only and only around plagiarism and citations. Because a research paper is almost like it's not almost, it is an intellectual property. It is someone's 5 years of hard work. You can't just take an idea from a research paper and claim it as your own. What I've added in the first line is like Oxford's definition of plagiarism, which is presenting work or ideas from another source as your own, with or without the consent of the original author, by incorporating without full acknowledgement. There's something called paraphrasing, which is that you see an idea and you like it, and you end up rewriting it in like different word, and you refine it in your own understanding, and you add it to your paper. Paraphrasing is also extremely ethically wrong because the core of the idea is not your own. The language might be, but your core idea is not yours, so it still counts as plagiarism. How you correct for plagiarism and how you ensure that it doesn't happen and that you're not flagged, you cite them. You cite sources, you cite these research papers, and you also end up including them in your reference list that you will create for your bibliography, which is always at the end of your research paper. This necessity to acknowledge someone's work or ideas or theory or models applies not only to text and like written things, but also to other media like graphs, like data, tables, all of these things. Anything that you copy from somewhere else is supposed to be cited. Now, if you're sending your work for publication to a magazine or a journal, always check their plagiarism provisions in their submission guidelines, because more often than not, it can happen that you accidentally ended up plagiarizing someone's work. You might not have read the research paper, but it can happen that your findings are also somewhat similar to theirs. That does count as plagiarism. However, the plagiarism provision for some publications allows for like a 5 to 10, maybe 15% plagiarism. So you'll have to check for that. And they would also have very importantly specified the citation style. There are several citation styles across academia. Every journal, every publication has their own citation styles, which you will compulsorily have to adopt so that your paper does not get rejected. How to cite? There are two main methods of citations, which you compulsorily have to use. It is in-text citation. It is of the format that's in the bracket. So, for example, if you've copied an idea and you want it, and there's no other way of using it other than how it's been written by that particular author, you add that line, and after that, you add this bracket with their last name and the year of publication. So, Kumar 2025 is probably an in-text citation that someone might use for a work that I have published in the year 2025. Then second is your reference list entry. This is going to look like the title of the paper, the authors, the year of publication, and as well as the link to where it has been published. How to go about making citations? It is not possible. It is not logistically efficient to make citations physically. So you have citation generators. There are tons and tons of softwares. What I use and what a lot of researchers use is Scribr. I have added a picture of it, what it looks like. So if you zoom in, and you'll see that it allows for a citation style. So what's been selected is APA 7th edition, which is a citation style. You could have a Chicago MLA citation style as well. So there are provisions for multiple citation options. Then you basically you can like enter the link of the research paper that you want to cite, and when you click on cite, it's going to automatically convert it into reference list entry as well as an in-text citation. However, it can sometimes happen that Scribr does not pick up, say, the author's name or the year of publication or what the journal or specific the specific sources. So in that case, you can always cite it manually. It'll take you to another window where you can physically and manually type in the author's name, their last name, which organization they're affiliated with, year of publication, all of that. So always use citations. The good thing about Scribr is that it also stores all your reference list entries for like a month if you have the free subscription. So do it for like as a temporary measure. Just just let it be there. But if you're working on a very long research project, make sure that you copy those reference list entries and those citations into another document. That's about citation. Any questions here? Anything that you need clarification on? Because these are grounds, not using proper citation are grounds for rejection of papers. The other thing is that you can check your plagiarism levels on Scribble. There is another website called Dupli Checker, which basically tells you what the percentage of your what percentage of your work is plagiarized. So remember what I said about how you might have mistakenly plagiarized someone's work. So a plagiarism checker will tell you which part of your work is plagiarized and what the actual source of that idea is. So it will take you there as well. So it's always good to check plagiarism level. Plus, publications also ask for a plagiarism report. We're nearing the end of the presentation, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
Hi, firstly, loving the session so far. How does a research article differ from a research paper, and what are the methodologies for a research article if I were to approach that?
Only in terms of the length. A research article is going to be very small, maybe 2,000 to 5,000 words is what they 5,000 words is the maximum. And you use very similar methodologies, except you just don't present it in such an extensive manner so as to have an abstract, a separate section for your discussions and your findings. It's more concise than a research paper, and it probably won't take you as long either. But you basically follow everything that you would do for a research paper otherwise. So that's the main difference.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Any other questions?
What is like a good number of research papers that one should read for writing a research paper?
That truly depends. So, for example, if it is a research area that has not been explored very well, you might not find more than 10 research papers specifically around that. So in that case, those 10 research papers are fine. But I would still say you shouldn't have to read more than 15, 20 for one project. That's also like a very average number. People read a lot of research papers in their lives for one project. So again, it's very subjective. Okay, we are also short on cutting on time. So I'll end my presentation with some tips that I had for new researchers. Always start small, but start somewhere. It's important to find a starting point for yourself. If you just sit on an idea, it's not going to give birth to itself. So start somewhere. Start with an article. Start with maybe a newspaper, and just get on with it. Always get into the habit of reading. We had a question on how to motivate yourself to keep researching or how to write. The only way you can do that is by extensive reading. Make reading targets for yourself. Start reading the newspaper. Start with magazine articles, and then you move on to proper full-fledged research papers. I discovered this website called a Substack, and it is a platform for like really good content, not just intellectual content and academic writing, but also just pure brain rot, which sometimes you need in your life. So always do that. This is important. The third one, learning statistical software like R, Stata, or even Python is extremely important. Why? Because there are infrastructural constraints in most colleges of DU. What I learned in econometrics for regression was Gretel, which is not used anywhere. So that was not of use to me. Instead, what I'm learning now in advanced econometrics in my master's is I'm using Python for regression. So Python as well as R. So it would help if your university does not, if your college is not providing you with resources to learn these. Take up free courses on YouTube. Take up an auditable course on Coursera if you don't want to pay for like the certificate, which is not important in my opinion. But what's important is that you learn. So you can like always learn R's. I think there is a course for R as a part of SEC or DSC. At least there was in my time, but I never took SEC seriously. So it depends. But yes, do start learning these tools. They're going to help you not just if you want to do econometrics again, but if you want to get into research, or even like if you're interested in finance, it's going to be of help. Talk to people, keep talking to people, talk to your seniors, talk to your professors. They're going to be your professors. I mean, I loved my faculty, and they were so helpful, and they're all, because they're researchers themselves, most of them are working on PhDs. They're going to know the nitty-gritties of conducting research, conducting a survey, so they're going to help you a lot. Reach out to RAs who are research assistants on LinkedIn, and keep asking them for tips, keep asking them for suggestions on reviewing your topic, reviewing your literature so far, and just keep talking to people. And most importantly, so that you don't get flagged and you're not called a thief, cite everything. But yeah, that was it for this session. That was all I had in my arsenal. Anything else you want to ask specific to the session in general? Feel free. I'm open for questions.
Okay, so I had one more question. Like, I was working on this research paper, and there were a lot of like research papers that I could find, but most of them were pre 2020, and the latest one I could find was like COVID times, and that is like a anomaly basically. So
Yeah.
you can't really bank on those. So like, what should I do in that case? Like, should I just go for the older research papers, or like what exactly?
So it depends. If you're looking for data, the old research paper might not be very helpful. Instead, you could go to somewhere where you can find recent data sources. However, if it is theories and findings that you're chasing, it's not going to change a lot in the last 5 years. Like it takes years for trends to actually shape. So even like pre-2020 research papers might be of immense help to you. Like for example, in my very new and updated course of MSc Economics, I am still reading like papers that were published in 1994 because the theories they gave then still apply now. So, and 2020 COVID times are like very new economically speaking. So they will be credible enough, but only if you're looking for theories and ideas given, not so much for data, I think. Anything else before I leave you guys to enjoy your Friday? Doesn't have to be
Any questions, guys?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be specific to the presentation. Also, I am open to answer anything.
I think one question I had was, so if, for example, like I'm researching for something and I do take a sample, but people I am able to reach are not diversified enough. If I'm able to not get, if my demographic is very uniform, I don't have a lot of diverse views. So in that case, should I just change my research question to answer, like focusing on that particular demographic?
So I think that even if you're defining a sample, it is almost always going to be specific to your study. It's not a randomized sample, right? So randomized trials are different, where you want like where you're chasing a very diverse sample. But if you're conducting a survey on a very small sample for a very semester like project, it I mean, yes, you should have a diverse sample, but it doesn't really matter if it's a very uniform demographic. So, for example, if you want to survey about how many people use the metro or public transportation, it makes more sense to survey people who use public transportation. So your demographic is going to be pretty uniform there. As long as it's not on the basis of like gender or sexual identity or age, then it's perfect.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Okay, it's 9:45 for you guys. If there are no questions, feel free to leave and we can end the meeting. But it was so nice to meet everyone and talk to you guys. I hope the session was meaningful and you learned something.
It was really great. I'm sure everybody had a really enriching and insightful experience. So we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much, Maithili, for taking this session. And thank you everybody for joining in. We'll be having many more such bootcamp sessions. This was just the starting. And yeah, that's it. Have a great night, everybody.